Have you ever been in a conversation where someone asked you, "What did you do yesterday?" and suddenly your mind froze?
Oh, yes. And somehow the only sentence that comes out is, yesterday I go to market.
Exactly. And the painful part is that you know it sounds wrong, but in that moment you cannot remember whether it should be go, went, gone, or something else.
And then you start panicking because the conversation keeps moving and your brain is still stuck on one verb.
That is one of the biggest reasons why so many English learners struggle with the past tense. It is not because the grammar is impossible. It is because in real conversations you have to think fast.
And when you think too much, you end up saying something strange like, yesterday I am going to the office.
Exactly. But here is the good news. By the end of this episode, you are going to understand the past tense in a much simpler way. You will know when to use it, how to build it naturally, and most importantly, how to stop overthinking every sentence.
And if you have ever felt embarrassed because you used the wrong verb in front of someone, trust me, you are not alone.
In fact, even advanced English learners sometimes make simple past tense mistakes when they are tired, nervous, or speaking too quickly.
That actually makes me feel better.
Good, because today on Talk Easy Daily, we are going to break everything down in a way that feels simple and practical.
Not like those grammar books that make you feel like you need a dictionary just to understand the explanation.
Exactly. We are going to talk like real people. Imagine you are telling a friend about your weekend, your childhood, your last holiday, or even what happened this morning. All of those situations need the past tense.
So basically, if you want to tell stories in English, you need this skill.
Absolutely. And storytelling is one of the most powerful parts of speaking English. Think about it. When you meet someone new, what do they ask?
They ask things like, where did you grow up? What did you study? What did you do last weekend?
Exactly. Almost every meaningful conversation includes the past tense.
Which means if you avoid using it, your English can sound incomplete.
Very incomplete. You might know hundreds of words, but if you cannot talk about the past, you cannot fully express yourself.
And that can feel frustrating because maybe in your mind, you know exactly what you want to say.
But the grammar becomes the wall between your thoughts and your words.
So where do most people make mistakes?
Usually in 3 places. First, they forget to change the verb. Second, they mix present tense and past tense in the same sentence. Third, they get confused by irregular verbs.
Ah, yes, the dangerous ones.
Very dangerous, because English loves to make simple things complicated.
Like go becomes went, not goed.
Exactly, and eat becomes ate, not eated.
Honestly, English can be so dramatic sometimes.
It can, but once you start seeing patterns, it becomes much easier. And later in this episode, we are going to talk about the biggest past tense mistakes people make every day.
And some of them might surprise you.
We are also going to share simple memory tricks so you can remember common past tense verbs more naturally.
So if you want to stop freezing in conversations and start speaking more confidently, keep watching because the next part might completely change the way you think about English grammar. And before we continue, comment below with one sentence about what you did yesterday. Even if you're not completely sure, try it.
Because the more you practice, the faster your English improves. And if you enjoy learning English in a simple and natural way, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to Talk Easy Daily, and stay with us, because the next part is where the real transformation begins. Let us start with the most important idea. The past tense is used when something already happened.
So if it happened yesterday, last week, last year, or even 5 minutes ago, I usually need the past tense.
Exactly. If the action is finished, you usually use the past tense.
That sounds simple.
It is simple. The problem is that many learners try to memorize too many rules before they understand the basic idea. So let us make it very easy. If the action is finished, use the past tense.
For example, I watched a movie last night.
Perfect. The movie is finished, last night is finished, so we used watched.
I visited my grandmother last weekend.
Exactly. The visit already happened, so again, past tense.
I cleaned my room this morning.
Very good. And notice something important here. Most regular verbs simply add ed.
Like watch becomes watched, clean becomes cleaned, visit becomes visited.
Exactly. Those are called regular verbs because they follow the normal pattern.
So maybe the first step is not to panic about every single verb.
Right, because a lot of English verbs are regular, and once you understand the pattern, you can use hundreds of verbs correctly.
That already feels less scary.
Good. Now here's a quick tip that can make your English sound much more natural. Try to use time words when you speak in the past tense.
Time words?
Words like yesterday, last night, last week, 2 days ago, in 2020, when I was a child, this morning.
Because they make it clear that I am talking about the past.
Exactly. Imagine someone says, I watched a movie.
That sounds okay, but it feels incomplete.
Right. But if they say, I watched a movie last night, now the sentence feels more natural and more complete.
It also helps the listener understand the story better.
Exactly. And if you want to sound more confident in English, adding those little time expressions can make a huge difference.
Let me try a few. I met my friend yesterday. I started learning English 2 years ago. I traveled to Lahore last month.
Perfect. And did you notice something interesting?
What?
You naturally changed the verbs. Meet became met. Start became started. Travel became traveled.
Wait, meet became met. That's not regular.
Exactly. And now we are entering the world of irregular verbs.
The scary place.
Yes, the place where English suddenly decides to ignore its own rules.
Why is it go and went? That makes no sense.
Honestly, even native speakers cannot explain why. We just learn it naturally over time.
That is both comforting and annoying.
True, but here's the good news. You do not need to memorize thousands of irregular verbs immediately. You only need to focus on the most common ones first.
Because those are the ones we use every day.
Exactly. Think about verbs like go, come, eat, see, make, take, give, find, think, know, tell.
Those appear in almost every conversation.
Exactly. So if you can master those common irregular verbs, your English will improve very quickly.
Let's do a few examples.
Great idea. Go becomes went.
I went to the supermarket yesterday.
Eat becomes ate.
I ate pizza for dinner.
See becomes saw.
I saw an old friend last week.
Take becomes took.
I took the bus this morning.
Perfect. And here's an important trick. Do not try to memorize irregular verbs as one long, boring list.
Because you will forget them.
Exactly. Instead, memorize them through stories and situations.
What do you mean?
For example, imagine your weekend. You can say, I went to the mall. I bought a shirt. I saw my cousin. We ate lunch together.
That feels much easier because it sounds like real life.
Exactly. Your brain remembers stories better than lists.
That is such a good point because when people study grammar, they often study isolated words. Yes, they study go, went, gone without any emotional connection. But if I imagine myself going to a restaurant with my friend, I can remember the sentence more easily.
Exactly. And here's something else many learners do wrong. They use the past tense twice in the same sentence.
What do you mean?
For example, someone says, did you went to school yesterday?
Oh yes, I've heard that mistake many times.
The correct sentence is, did you go to school yesterday?
Because when we use did, the main verb goes back to the base form.
Exactly. This is one of the most important rules in English questions and negatives.
So if I say, did you eat breakfast? Not, did you ate breakfast?
Perfect. And if I say, I did not go, not I did not went.
That mistake is so common.
Very common, because people think this is past tense, so every verb should be past.
But actually, did already carries the past tense.
Exactly. So the main verb returns to its basic form.
Let me test myself. Did you watch the movie? Correct.
Yes.
Did you watch the movie? Wrong.
Exactly.
I did not see him. Correct. I did not saw him. Wrong.
Perfect. And if you can remember that one rule, you will immediately sound much more natural in English conversations.
I think this is one of those small grammar points that creates a huge difference.
It really does. And here's something funny. Many English learners know the rule, but they still make the mistake.
That is actually one of the best methods.
Really?
Yes. Imagine you are alone at home. You can describe your day in English. I woke up at 7, I drank coffee, I answered emails, I talked to my friend.
That sounds simple, but I can see how it would help.
It helps because you are connecting grammar with your real life.
And that probably makes it easier to remember.
Exactly. Your brain loves personal information. If the sentence is about your own life, you remember it faster.
So maybe every night before sleeping, you can spend 2 minutes talking about your day in English.
That is a fantastic habit. And if you do that every day for 1 month, your past tense will improve dramatically.
Because you are using the same grammar again and again.
Exactly. Repetition creates confidence.
And confidence is everything when you speak English.
It really is, because many people do not have a grammar problem, they have a confidence problem.
That is so true. Sometimes people know the right sentence, but they are afraid to say it.
Exactly. They worry too much about making mistakes.
But the truth is, everyone makes mistakes.
Even native speakers.
Really?
Of course. Native speakers sometimes say the wrong verb, forget words, or change their sentence in the middle of speaking.
That makes me feel better, because sometimes English learners think they have to be perfect.
No, you do not need to be perfect. You just need to communicate clearly.
And the more you practice, the more natural it becomes.
Exactly. And in the next part, we are going to talk about some of the biggest past tense mistakes people make in real conversations.
Including mistakes that might be secretly making your English sound unnatural without you even realizing it.
And trust me, one of those mistakes is something almost every English learner has done at least once.
So stay with us, because the next part could completely change the way you speak English every day.
And if you are enjoying this episode, comment below with one irregular verb that always confuses you.
And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Talk Easy Daily, because we are just getting started.
One of the biggest mistakes English learners make is mixing present tense and past tense in the same sentence.
Oh yes, like saying, yesterday I go to the store and buy some milk.
Exactly. You started in the past with yesterday, but then the verbs stayed in the present tense.
So the correct sentence would be, yesterday I went to the store and bought some milk.
Perfect. And this mistake happens because when people are speaking quickly, they forget to keep every verb in the same time frame.
That is actually something I have done many times.
Most learners have. Imagine you are telling a story. Once you enter the past, usually all the actions inside that story stay in the past.
So if I say, last weekend I visited my cousin, we watched a movie, and then we ate dinner, everything matches.
Exactly. But if you say, last weekend I visited my cousin, we watch a movie, and then we eat dinner, it sounds strange.
Because the tenses are fighting each other.
That is a great way to describe it. They are fighting each other.
So one trick is to imagine the whole story happening inside one timeline.
Exactly. If the story happened in the past, keep your verbs in the past.
That sounds simple, but I think people forget when they're nervous.
They do. That is why speaking slowly can actually improve your grammar.
Really?
Absolutely. Many people think fluent English means speaking very fast, but fast English with many mistakes is not as effective as slower English with clear grammar.
That is such an important point, because people often try to sound fluent by speaking quickly. But true fluency is about clarity, not speed. That's good news for people who feel slow when they speak.
Exactly. You do not need to rush. In fact, if you slow down slightly, you give your brain more time to choose the correct verb.
So instead of saying random words quickly, you can build the sentence more carefully.
Yes, and that makes you sound more confident too.
Another mistake I hear a lot is when people use was and were incorrectly.
That is another very common problem. For example, some learners say, we was happy, or they was tired.
But it should be, we were happy and they were tired.
Exactly. Use was with I, he, she, and it.
I was tired, she was late, it was cold.
Perfect. And use were with you, we, and they.
You were busy, we were excited, they were hungry.
Exactly. And here's a small memory trick. If the subject sounds bigger or includes more people, were is usually the better choice.
That is actually helpful.
Now let's talk about another mistake that creates a lot of confusion. Some people say things like, I did not knew.
Ah, yes, we talked about that earlier.
Right, but it is such an important mistake that it deserves extra attention.
Because when we use did not, the next verb must be in the base form.
Exactly. So you say, I did not know.
Not I did not knew.
Correct. She did not come. Not she did not came.
We did not eat, not we did not ate.
Perfect. And here's a quick challenge for everyone watching. Which sentence is correct? Did you saw him or did you see him?
The correct answer is, did you see him?
Exactly. And if you got that right, you are already improving.
You know what's funny? Sometimes learners understand these rules when they are reading, but then forget them when speaking.
That happens because speaking is a different skill. Reading gives you time to think. Speaking happens in real time.
So if you want to improve your speaking, you need speaking practice.
Exactly. You cannot become a better speaker only by reading grammar books.
That's like reading a book about swimming but never getting into the water.
Perfect comparison.
So what is one of the best ways to practice the past tense in real life?
One very effective method is to tell small stories every day.
Like what?
Imagine you are talking to a friend. You can say, this morning I woke up late. I missed the bus. Then I bought coffee and arrived at work 10 minutes late.
That sounds like a real story.
Exactly. And because it is a real story, your brain pays more attention.
I think that's much more interesting than memorizing random grammar exercises.
It is, because language is not only about rules. Language is about communication.
And stories are one of the most natural forms of communication.
Exactly. Humans love stories. We remember stories, we connect with stories.
That's probably why people enjoy listening to podcasts and watching videos.
Yes, because stories create emotion, and emotion helps memory.
So if you want to remember the past tense, connect it to moments in your own life.
Exactly. Think about your last holiday, your first day at school, your favorite childhood memory, or even what you ate for breakfast.
Let me try. When I was a child, I played outside every evening. I climbed trees, I rode my bike, and I spent time with my friends.
Perfect. And notice how natural that sounds because you are talking about real experiences.
I can see how this would make practice more enjoyable.
Definitely. And here's another important thing. Do not be afraid of making mistakes while practicing.
That is hard for many people.
I know, but mistakes are part of learning.
Sometimes people stay silent because they are afraid of saying the wrong verb.
And silence is much worse than a small mistake.
Because if you never speak, you never improve.
Exactly. Think about a child learning to walk. They fall many times.
But nobody says, you fell down, so maybe walking is not for you.
Exactly. They keep trying. And language works the same way.
That is such a good reminder.
So if you say, yesterday I go to the store, and someone corrects you, that is not failure.
It's progress.
Exactly. Because now you know the correct sentence is, yesterday I went to the store.
And next time you are more likely to remember it.
Right.
every mistake teaches you something. I think that mindset can really help people become more confident. Absolutely. Because confidence grows when you stop expecting perfection. And start focusing on communication. Exactly. And now let's talk about a mistake that sounds small, but can make a big difference. Many learners forget to pronounce the ed ending correctly. Oh wow, that is true. For example, some people say watched very strongly, even when native speakers pronounce it more softly. So watched sounds more like one smooth word. Exactly. And worked sounds like worked. Played sounds like played. Very good. The ed ending changes depending on the verb. That sounds difficult. It can be at first, but don't worry too much. The most important thing is to notice the sound when native speakers talk. So listening is just as important as grammar practice? Absolutely. Because if you only study grammar rules but never listen to real English, your speaking can sound unnatural. That makes sense. So watch videos, listen to podcasts, repeat sentences, and pay attention to how people pronounce past tense verbs. Maybe even pause the video and repeat the sentence out loud. That is a fantastic method. Because then you are training your ears and your mouth at the same time.
Exactly. And in the next part, we are going to talk about some everyday situations where you can use the past tense naturally.
Like talking about your job, your family, your childhood, your last vacation, and even embarrassing moments.
Especially embarrassing moments.
Because somehow, those are always the easiest stories to remember.
They really are. And trust me, some of those examples might sound very familiar to your own life.
So stay with us, because the next part will help you turn grammar into real conversation.
And if you are learning something useful, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Talk Easy Daily, and share it with someone who wants to improve their English. Let us imagine a very common situation. Someone asks you, "How was your weekend?"
That question is everywhere.
Exactly. Friends ask it, coworkers ask it, classmates ask it, and your answer almost always needs the past tense.
So I could say, my weekend was great. I visited my parents, watched a movie, and cooked dinner.
Perfect. That answer sounds natural because all the actions are in the past.
And it also sounds more interesting than just saying it was good.
Exactly. One-word answers stop conversations. Details continue conversations.
That is such a good point. If someone says, my weekend was good, there's not much to say after that.
Right. But if they say, "My weekend was great, I went hiking with my friends, and then we ate at a small restaurant," now the conversation can continue.
Because the other person can ask questions.
Exactly. They might ask, "Where did you go hiking?" or "What food did you eat?"
So using the past tense well can actually help you become a better conversationalist.
Absolutely. And this is important because English is not only about correct grammar, it is about connecting with people.
That is true. When you share stories, people remember you more.
Exactly. Imagine you meet someone new and they ask about your childhood.
That's definitely a past tense situation.
Yes. You might say, "When I was a child, I lived in a small town. I played football every evening and spent a lot of time with my cousins."
That sounds warm and personal.
Exactly. And notice how the past tense helps create a picture in the listener's mind.
I think that's why stories are so powerful.
They are. And the better you become at using the past tense, the easier it becomes to tell stories naturally.
Let me try another example. When I was younger, I hated vegetables. I only ate pizza and fries.
That is a fantastic example.
And honestly, probably true for many people.
Very true. Here's another common situation. Job interviews.
Oh wow, past tense is everywhere in job interviews.
Everywhere. People ask questions like, "What did you study? Where did you work before? What projects did you complete?"
So if someone asks, what did you do in your last job? I could answer, I managed a small team, answered customer emails, and organized weekly meetings.
Perfect. And notice again, because the question already uses did, the main verb in the question stays in the base form.
What did you did, not what did you did it.
Exactly. That mistake sounds very unnatural, so it's important to remember.
Another situation where people use the past tense all the time is travel.
Absolutely. People love talking about travel experiences.
Questions like, where did you go? What did you see? Did you enjoy the trip?
Exactly. You could say, "Last year I traveled to Turkey. I visited Istanbul, tried local food, and took hundreds of photos."
That sounds much more exciting than saying, I go Turkey last year.
Definitely. And here's something important. The more specific your story becomes, the more interesting your English sounds.
So instead of saying, I had a nice trip, I could say, I had a nice trip. I stayed near the beach, watched the sunset every evening, and met people from different countries.
Exactly. Details make your English more alive.
That's probably why some people sound more fluent even if they don't use very advanced vocabulary.
That is exactly why. Fluency is not only about difficult words, it is about creating clear and interesting sentences.
That's such a powerful idea. because many learners think they need huge vocabulary lists.
But often, simple words used well are much more effective.
So instead of trying to impress people with difficult words, focus on telling better stories.
Exactly. That's what real communication is.
You know what is another interesting past tense situation? Talking about embarrassing moments.
Those stories are always memorable.
Because everyone has them.
Absolutely. Imagine someone says, "Tell me about an embarrassing moment."
I could say, one day I walked into the wrong classroom, sat down, and realized 10 minutes later that I was in the wrong place.
That is a perfect example.
Or, I sent a message to the wrong person and felt so embarrassed.
Exactly. And those kinds of stories are great for practicing because they are emotional.
And emotional stories are easier to remember.
Right. Your brain remembers things that made you laugh, feel nervous, or feel surprised.
That explains why people can remember embarrassing moments from 10 years ago.
Exactly. Sometimes more clearly than what they ate yesterday.
So maybe one way to practice to past tense is to think about the funniest or strangest moments in your life.
That is a fantastic idea. You could tell yourself stories like, "The funniest thing happened yesterday," or "When I was in school, something embarrassing happened."
And then just keep talking.
Exactly. Don't stop to worry about every little mistake. Just keep going.
Because the goal is to build confidence and rhythm.
Yes, and over time, your grammar becomes more natural.
I think a lot of learners don't realize how important repetition is.
Repetition is everything.
Because you can't use a grammar structure once and expect to master it forever.
Exactly. You need to see it, hear it, speak it, and repeat it many times.
Kind of like going to the gym.
Perfect comparison. You can't exercise one time and expect huge results.
But if you keep doing it regularly, you become stronger.
Exactly. English works the same way. Small daily practice creates big improvement.
So maybe instead of studying grammar for 3 hours once a week, it's better to practice for 10 minutes every day.
Much better.
Because daily practice keeps the language fresh in your mind.
Exactly. And it also feels less stressful.
That's important because many people give up when studying feels too difficult.
Yes, they think they need to be perfect immediately.
But language learning is not about being perfect. It's about improving little by little.
Exactly. Even one new sentence every day is progress.
Let me ask you something. What if someone keeps forgetting irregular verbs?
That is completely normal. Irregular verbs take time.
So what should they do?
Focus on the most common verbs first. Learn maybe 10 or 15 very common irregular verbs and use them again and again.
Like go went, eat ate, see saw, come came.
Exactly. Because those verbs appear all the time in daily conversations.
And maybe don't try to memorize 50 irregular verbs in one day.
Definitely not. That usually leads to frustration.
So smaller steps are better.
Much better. Learn a few verbs, use them in sentences, repeat them in stories, and then slowly add more.
That sounds much more realistic.
It is. And remember, confidence grows through practice, not perfection.
That is such an important message.
Because many people are waiting to become perfect before they speak.
But that day never comes.
Exactly. The people who improve are the people who speak before they feel ready.
That is a little scary.
It is. But it is also powerful.
Because every conversation teaches you something.
Exactly. Every conversation is practice.
And in the next part, we are going to talk about real mini stories and examples that show how native speakers use the past tense naturally.
Including situations at work, at school, with friends, and even during travel.
And some of those examples might sound exactly like situations from your own life.
So stay with us, because the next part is where everything starts to feel even more real.
And if you are enjoying this conversation, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Talk Easy Daily, and share this episode with someone who always says go to instead of went.
I think we all know at least one person like that. Let us look at some real-life mini-stories, because this is where the past tense becomes much easier to remember.
I love this part because stories feel more natural than grammar rules.
Exactly. Imagine your friend asks, "Why were you late today?"
I could say, I woke up late, missed the bus, and had to take a taxi.
Perfect. That answer sounds natural because every action happened in the past.
And it also sounds like a real situation because honestly, that happens to so many people.
Exactly. Now imagine someone asks, "How was your first day at your new job?"
I could say, I felt nervous at first, but everyone was friendly. My manager showed me around the office and I met my new team.
That is a fantastic answer.
It feels much more complete than just saying it was okay.
Exactly. And here's something important. Native speakers often use the past tense to create little scenes in the listener's mind.
So instead of saying, I had a bad day, they explain what happened.
Right. They might say, I had a bad day because my phone died, my car would not start, and I forgot my wallet at home.
That sounds so much more vivid.
Exactly. And the more details you add, the more interesting your English becomes.
Let us do another one. Imagine someone asks, what happened at the party?
Great example.
I could say, the music was loud, everyone danced, and one person accidentally dropped a drink on the floor.
Perfect.
And because you are describing events, the past tense feels very natural.
I think this is why people need to practice telling stories instead of only doing grammar exercises.
Absolutely, because grammar exercises teach the rule, but stories teach real communication.
Let me try another one. Last weekend, I went shopping with my friend. We looked at clothes, drank coffee, and talked for hours.
Excellent. That sounds like something a native speaker would say.
And none of the words are difficult.
Exactly. That is the beauty of good English. It does not have to be complicated.
Sometimes simple English is actually more powerful.
It often is, because simple English is easier to understand, easier to remember, and easier to use in real conversations.
That's such a good reminder for people who always think they need more advanced vocabulary.
Yes, many learners think fluency means using big words.
But real fluency is being able to express your ideas clearly.
Exactly. Here's another mini story. Imagine someone asks, "What did you do during your holiday?"
I could say, I stayed in a small hotel near the beach. Every morning I walked by the ocean, and every evening I watched the sunset.
That sounds beautiful.
It also sounds very easy to understand.
Exactly. And that is the goal.
Let us talk about school, because so many people need the past tense for school conversations.
Absolutely. Students often talk about exams, classes, teachers, and homework.
So someone might say, yesterday I studied for 3 hours, finished my homework, and prepared for my exam.
Perfect.
Or, when I was in school, I loved history, but I hated math.
That's another great example.
Sorry to all the math lovers watching this.
I am sure they survived.
Hopefully.
Here's another common topic, childhood memories.
People love talking about childhood memories.
They do, because childhood stories are emotional, funny, and relatable.
For example, when I was a child, I spent every summer at my grandmother's house.
Very natural.
Or, when I was younger, I believed that monsters lived under my bed.
That is something many people can relate to.
It is funny because childhood memories often sound strange when you say them out loud.
Very true. But those strange details make stories more interesting.
Like, when I was 7 years old, I tried to cut my own hair and it looked terrible.
That is a fantastic story.
And probably true for many people.
Probably. Here's another important point. Native speakers often connect past tense sentences with words like then, after that, later, and finally.
Because those words help organize the story.
Exactly. Listen to this example. Yesterday, I woke up late, then I rushed to the kitchen. After that, I realized I forgot my keys. Finally, I left the house 20 minutes late.
That sounds much smoother than saying random sentences.
Exactly. These linking words make your English sound more natural and more organized.
So if someone wants to tell better stories, they should learn words like then, after that, suddenly, later, and finally.
Absolutely. Those words are simple, but they make a big difference.
Here's a quick challenge for everyone watching. Try to tell a short story about your morning using those words.
Great idea.
You could say, this morning I woke up late. Then I made coffee. After that, I checked my phone. Finally, I got ready for work.
Perfect. That's a simple story, but it sounds natural.
And if you can tell simple stories well, you can have much better conversations in English.
Exactly. You don't need perfect grammar all the time. You just need enough grammar to communicate your ideas clearly.
That is something I wish more English learners understood.
Me too, because so many people stop themselves from speaking because they are afraid of making mistakes.
But mistakes are normal.
Completely normal.
In fact, some of the funniest conversations happen because of mistakes.
That is true. Sometimes a mistake becomes a story you remember forever.
I once heard someone say, yesterday I was very boring.
That is a classic mistake.
They wanted to say, yesterday I was very bored.
Exactly. Boring describes something that causes boredom. Bored describes how you feel.
So if you say, I was boring, it sounds like people didn't enjoy being with you.
Exactly, which is probably not what they wanted to say.
That's actually a very funny mistake.
It is, and those kinds of mistakes are useful because they are memorable.
Which means you probably won't make the same mistake again.
Exactly. Funny mistakes often become the easiest lessons to remember.
Here is another one. Some people say, I am graduate last year.
Right. The correct sentence is, I graduated last year.
Because graduate becomes graduated.
Exactly. Or they can say, I am a graduate, but that has a different meaning.
English really loves confusing people sometimes.
It does, but the more examples you hear, the easier it becomes.
That is why listening is so important.
Absolutely. When you hear natural English again and again, your brain starts to notice the patterns.
And then eventually, the correct sentence starts to feel natural.
Exactly. That is the moment when English becomes easier.
Not because the grammar changed, but because your brain became more familiar with it.
Perfectly said.
And in the next part, we are going to go even deeper into how to sound more natural with the past tense.
Including advanced tips that can make your stories more interesting, more emotional, and more memorable.
So stay with us because the next part might completely change the way you tell stories in English.
And if you're enjoying this episode, do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Talk Easy Daily because we still have some of the best tips ahead. One of the fastest ways to sound more natural in English is to stop speaking in very short, disconnected sentences.
You mean sentences like, I went to the store, I bought milk, I came home.
Exactly. Those sentences are correct, but they sound a little robotic.
So how can we make them sound more natural?
By connecting ideas together. For example, instead of saying, I went to the store, I bought milk, I came home, you could say, I went to the store, bought some milk, and then came home.
That sounds much smoother.
Exactly. Native speakers often connect actions together when they talk about the past.
So instead of speaking like a robot, you speak more like you are telling a story.
Exactly. Listen to this example. Yesterday, I finished work, met a friend for coffee, and then watched a movie.
That sounds very natural.
And it sounds more confident, too.
I think people sometimes forget that confidence is not only about grammar, it's also about rhythm.
That is very true. People who sound fluent often have a natural rhythm when they speak.
Even if they make small mistakes sometimes.
Exactly. Because communication is not about perfection. It's about flow.
So maybe one goal should be to connect your sentences more naturally.
Absolutely. And here's another tip. Native speakers often use feelings when they tell stories.
What do you mean?
Instead of only saying what happened, they also say how they felt.
Oh, that makes the story more emotional.
Exactly. Compare these two sentences. I went to the airport, my flight was delayed.
That sounds okay, but a little flat.
Right. Now listen to this. I went to the airport, but my flight was delayed for 3 hours and I felt so frustrated.
That sounds much more real.
Exactly. Feelings make stories more interesting.
So instead of only saying, I lost my phone, I could say, I lost my phone and I felt really stressed.
Perfect. Or I met my favorite singer and I was so excited.
That sounds much more alive.
Exactly. Stories become memorable when people can imagine the emotion behind them.
That's such a powerful tip because sometimes English learners focus so much on grammar that they forget about emotion.
Yes, but emotion is what makes people listen.
Let me try another one. When I got home, I realized I forgot my keys inside and I felt so stupid.
That is perfect.
And honestly, very relatable.
Extremely relatable.
I think everyone has had a moment like that. Definitely. And those relatable moments are great for practicing because they feel personal. Another thing native speakers do is add small details.
Exactly. Small details can make even a simple story sound interesting.
So instead of saying, I went to a restaurant, I could say, I went to a small Italian restaurant near my house.
Perfect. Or instead of saying, I saw a dog, you could say, I saw a huge dog running across the street.
Those details help people imagine the scene.
Exactly. And when people can imagine the scene, your English feels much stronger.
So maybe the secret is not learning harder grammar.
Often, the secret is simply adding more life to your sentences.
That is such an interesting idea.
It is, because many learners think fluency comes from difficult vocabulary.
But sometimes fluency comes from simple words used in a more interesting way.
Exactly. Here is an example. Last weekend, I went to the beach.
That is okay, but simple.
Right. Now listen to this. Last weekend, I went to the beach with my cousins and we stayed there until sunset.
That sounds much more interesting.
Exactly. And you only added a few extra words.
I think this is something viewers can practice immediately.
Absolutely. Take one simple sentence and add one more detail.
I watched a movie becomes I watched a movie with my brother.
Perfect.
I ate dinner becomes I ate dinner at a new restaurant.
Exactly.
I visited my friend becomes I visited my friend after work.
Perfect. Those extra details make a huge difference.
Here is another thing I notice. Native speakers often use the word because when telling stories.
Yes, because helps explain the reason behind something.
So instead of saying I stayed home, I could say I stayed home because I felt tired.
Exactly. Or I missed the bus because I woke up late.
That sounds much more natural.
It does. And when you explain why something happened, your stories become more complete.
That makes sense, because in real conversations, people usually want more than just the action.
Exactly. They want the reason too.
Why were you late? Why did you quit your job? Why did you move to another city?
Exactly. And those answers often need the past tense.
Here's something interesting. Sometimes the smallest words make the biggest difference.
That is very true.
Words like then, because, suddenly, after that, and finally.
Those words are powerful because they help connect ideas.
And connected ideas sound more fluent.
Exactly. Imagine someone says, yesterday I went to the supermarket. I forgot my wallet. I came home.
That sounds okay, but very basic.
Right. Now listen to this. Yesterday I went to the supermarket, but then I realized I forgot my wallet, so I came home.
That sounds much smoother.
Exactly. And smoother English sounds more confident.
I think confidence is one of the biggest goals for most English learners.
Definitely. Most people do not want perfect English, they want confident English.
Because confidence helps you enjoy conversations more.
Exactly. When you feel confident, you stop worrying so much about every little mistake.
And then speaking becomes more fun.
Which is very important, because if learning English feels stressful all the time, people lose motivation.
That is true. People need to enjoy the process.
Exactly. And one of the best ways to enjoy English is to talk about things that are personal and interesting to you.
Like your favorite memory, your last trip, your funniest mistake, or your childhood.
Exactly. Those topics make practice feel more natural.
Let me ask you something. What if someone understands the past tense but still forgets it during conversation?
That is completely normal.
Really?
Of course. Understanding grammar and using grammar in real time are two different things.
So what should people do?
Practice automatic speaking.
What does that mean?
It means choosing a topic and speaking for 1 minute without stopping.
Even if you make mistakes?
Especially if you make mistakes.
That sounds scary.
It can feel scary at first, but it is one of the fastest ways to improve.
So maybe I choose a topic like my last vacation and speak for 1 minute.
Exactly. You could say, last year I traveled to another city. I stayed in a hotel, visited museums, and tried local food.
And if I forget a word?
Keep going. Use simpler words. Do not stop.
Because the goal is fluency, not perfection.
Exactly. And over time, your brain becomes faster at choosing the correct past tense verbs.
That is such a useful exercise.
It really is. And if you do it every day, you will notice huge improvement.
Even just 1 minute a day?
Even 1 minute a day.
That is actually very encouraging because most people can find 1 minute.
Exactly. Small habits create big results.
And in the next part, we are going to recap everything we talked about and give you the most important rules to remember.
Plus, we are going to share one final mindset shift that could completely change the way you think about speaking English.
So stay with us because the final part might be the most important one yet. And if this episode is helping you, do not forget to like the video, subscribe to Talk Easy Daily, and share it with someone who wants to sound more natural in English.
Let us quickly recap the most important ideas from this episode, because sometimes the simplest rules are the most powerful.
Rule number 1. If the action is finished, use the past tense.
Exactly. If something happened yesterday, last week, last month, or even 5 minutes ago, you usually need the past tense.
Rule number 2. Regular verbs usually add ed.
Right. Watch becomes watched. Clean becomes cleaned. Visit becomes visited.
Rule number 3. Irregular verbs are different, so you need to learn them little by little.
Exactly. Go becomes went. Eat becomes ate. See becomes saw. Take becomes took.
And instead of memorizing huge lists, it's better to learn them through stories.
Absolutely, because stories are easier to remember than random words.
Rule number 4. When you use did or did not, the next verb returns to the base form.
Exactly. Did you go, not did you went. I did not see him, not I did not saw him.
That is one of the biggest mistakes people make.
It is, but now you know how to avoid it.
Rule number 5. Try not to mix present tense and past tense in the same story.
Exactly. If the story happened in the past, keep the verbs in the past.
Yesterday, I went to the store and bought some food.
Perfect.
Not yesterday, I go to the store and buy some food.
Exactly. That sounds unnatural because the verbs do not match.
Rule number 7. Use time words like yesterday, last night, 2 days ago, and when I was a child.
Yes, those little expressions make your English sound clearer and more natural.
Rule number 7. Connect your ideas together.
Exactly. Use words like then, after that, because, suddenly, later, and finally.
Because connected sentences sound more fluent.
They do. Compare these two examples. I woke up late. I missed the bus. I was tired.
That sounds okay, but very basic.
Right. Now listen to this. I woke up late, missed the bus, and felt tired for the rest of the day.
That sounds much smoother.
Exactly. And smoother English often sounds more confident.
I think that is one of the biggest lessons from today. Confidence matters so much.
It really does, because many people already know more English than they think.
But fear stops them from speaking.
Exactly. They are so afraid of making mistakes that they stay silent.
And silence feels safe in the moment, but it slows down your progress.
Very true, because you don't become a better speaker by waiting.
You become a better speaker by speaking.
Exactly. Even if your grammar is not perfect, even if you make mistakes, even if you forget a word.
Because every conversation teaches you something.
Absolutely. Every mistake is feedback.
And every correction makes you stronger.
Exactly. Think about the first time you learned to ride a bicycle.
You probably fell down a few times.
Probably more than a few times.
But you kept trying because you knew falling was part of the process.
Exactly. And English works the same way.
That is such an important reminder because so many people feel embarrassed when they make mistakes.
But mistakes are not proof that you are bad at English.
They are proof that you are trying.
Exactly. And people who keep trying always improve.
So if you have been avoiding conversations because you are afraid of using the wrong tense, this is your sign to stop waiting.
Start small. Tell one short story every day.
Talk about what you did this morning.
Talk about what you ate yesterday.
Talk about your last holiday.
Talk about your childhood memories.
Talk about the funniest thing that happened to you last week.
The more you talk, the more natural the past tense becomes.
And one day you will notice something amazing.
You will stop translating every sentence in your head.
You will stop panicking about every verb.
And you will start speaking more naturally.
That is the moment when English starts to feel real.
Exactly. Not because you became perfect, but because you became comfortable.
And comfortable English is powerful English.
It really is.
Before we finish, we want to hear from you.
Yes, write a comment below and tell us one thing you did yesterday using the past tense.
It can be something simple like, I watched a movie, or I cooked dinner for my family.
Or if you want a bigger challenge, tell us a short story about your weekend.
And try to use words like then, after that, because, and finally.
We would love to read your comments.
And if this episode helped you understand the past tense more clearly, do not forget to like this video.
Subscribe to Talk Easy Daily for more English lessons that feel simple, practical, and natural.
And share this episode with a friend who always says good instead of went.
We all know someone like that.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Keep practicing, keep speaking, and most importantly, keep believing in yourself. Because your English can improve faster than you think.
We will see you in the next episode of Talk Easy Daily.
See you next time.